Hey everyone, I hope you had a wonderful day of worship yesterday. I enjoyed worshiping with my mom at her church, which is the church I grew up in, and had this special delight of hearing my very first piano teacher, who is now a retired missionary with One Mission Society, Kathy Murphy. She and her husband served in Spain for over 30 years. But she was my very first piano teacher when I was in fifth grade and she was in high school. And she played the piano yesterday for worship, and it was beautiful, as always, to hear Kathy play. So that was a special gift from the Lord to be there on that particular Sunday. She and her husband have now retired in Shreve, and so I hope to get to see them from time to time. So, as we continue with our Psalm study, last week we looked at Psalms 16, 17, and 18. And I was sort of parking in Psalm 16. And if I had to title it, I'd use the word refuge. And that's where we're going to circle around this evening. But before we do that, I want to point out something in Psalm 16 that I want you to be attentive to as we move through the book of Psalms. If you look in whatever version of the Bible you're using to study these Psalms, you're going to see probably before verse 1 and possibly in italics or in parentheses the phrase a miktam or a song or a psalm of David. And that's called in our English versions the superscription because it's written above the beginning of the psalm. But those words are not extra in the Hebrew text. These are actually the beginnings of the psalm. They're actually the first verse of the psalm in the Hebrew text. So it's not just extra information. This is not like the titles that are given to these psalms. This is not editorial. This was actually part of the original psalm. And so that line, a miktam of David, or of David, it sort of centers us that this song comes from a real person, David, out of his real lived experience of faith. And we don't really know what that word miktam means. It's some kind of poetry or song designation. We also see it in Psalms 56 through 60. But a lot of our Psalms will have these little superscriptions before the first verse in our English version. So I encourage you not to skip those, but to pay attention to those because they anchor these Psalms in the real lived faith experience of a real person, who, whether it's David or Solomon or Asaph or someone else. So this Psalm 16, after the designation that this is from David, begins with a petition. And we see this in verses 1 and 2. This is the basic or the central prayer of this psalm. And David says, "Protect me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good or no security apart from you." The basic prayer of Psalm 16 is for protection. David is either in a precarious situation or he anticipates being in a very precarious and risky situation. And so he prays, "Protect me." And he anchors that prayer in a decision that he has already made. Because I have taken refuge in you. And that's a really key phrase in the Psalms. You'll see this verb to take refuge more than 30 times in the book of Psalms. And you'll see the noun, you are my refuge, all over the place in the book of Psalms. And it's often paired with words like rock and fortress and stronghold and security and shelter. In the prophets, especially in the book of Isaiah, this kind of rock and fortress and refuge is contrasted with all the other potential things that we could find security in. Only the Lord is a rock and a refuge and a stronghold. And so this choice to take refuge in the Lord is a choice not to seek security in the other sources, whether those are political alliances or military strength or other gods, other allegiances. David can ask the Lord for protection because he has made this choice to seek his security, to seek his stronghold only in Yahweh, only in God. So then the rest of Psalm 16 actually gives us a picture of what it looks like to take refuge. And we see that this is a choice that affects really all the aspects of our lives: social, mental, and emotional, physical. There are implications for the totality of our life from that one choice to take refuge in the Lord, to make the Lord our stronghold and our strong tower. So let's just work our way through this bit by bit. First of all, let's look at verses 3 and 4 that really touch on the social and ideological implications of the choice to take refuge in the Lord. Verses 3 and 4. As for the holy ones in the land, they are my delight, the noble ones in whom is all my delight. Those who choose another God multiply their sorrows. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out. I will not take their name upon my lips. These two verses, in a sense, take us all the way back to Psalm 1, where we discussed the issue of delight and what it means to delight in the Lord. But they also link us to Psalm 15. Do you remember last week when we talked about the question about whom will we honor? And part of taking refuge in the Lord is honoring or delighting in the company of those who honor the Lord, the holy ones, the saints, and refusing to align ourselves with those who do not honor the Lord, those who take another God, those who follow other loyalties. So we're right back to where we were last week, that part of taking refuge in the Lord is this choice to align ourselves with the Lord and with those who honor the Lord, and to not give our associations or our practices or our allegiances to those who do not honor the Lord. So that's the first sort of set of implications of choosing to take refuge in the Lord. It has implications for our social decisions and the ideological forces with whom we choose to align ourselves. And then in verses 5 through 8, we see this really interesting way that taking refuge in the Lord impacts our mental and emotional life. Let's hear those verses. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I have a goodly heritage. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night, my heart also instructs me. I keep the Lord always before me, because he has at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Do you hear the psalmist's self-talk here, to use a very contemporary phrase? He speaks truth to himself about himself because of his decision to take refuge in the Lord. He says to himself and about himself what is true according to the Lord's perspective. Even in the dark watches of the night, when the enemy has seemingly the most easy pathway into our minds and into our spirits, the psalmist makes the decision to speak what is true. What is true is that the Lord has taken care of him, that the Lord has declared him to dwell in pleasant places, and that the Lord is constantly with him. And so even in the dark watches of the night, when our mental state and our emotional state is most vulnerable, the psalmist says, taking refuge in the Lord means that I will speak truth. So it may be as simple as claiming a soundtrack for ourselves that is truth-based and that will leave no room for the enemy's lies, even in those dark hours, those wee hours of the night when we are wakeful and vulnerable. And then in verses 9 and 10, we see something that we've talked about before, that the decision to take refuge in the Lord, which is a decision of faith and trust, has implications not just for our social existence, not just for our inner spiritual, mental, emotional existence. It also has implications for our bodies, for our embodied life as human beings. Here are verses 9 and 10. Therefore, my heart is glad and my soul rejoices. That can sound a little spiritual. My body also rests secure. For you do not give me up to Sheol. You do not let your faithful one see the pit. The choice to take refuge in the Lord rebounds in our physical being. There are physical benefits to the choice to take refuge in the Lord, both now in our present existence and in the confidence that we will be resurrected bodily to share in the full presence of Jesus in the future. So all of our existence, social, mental, ideological, emotional, and physical, is impacted by our choice to take refuge in the Lord. And then in verse 11, the psalmist summarizes this whole decision, this whole experience of finding refuge in the Lord. You show me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Maybe we could summarize taking refuge in the Lord as simply choosing to exist fully in the presence of God. So let's just review a little bit some of the actions of a person who takes refuge in the Lord. And I'm just going to put these in the first person singular. I'm going to make them as I statements. And I want you to think about how much are you appropriating and practicing this taking refuge in your own life? And what is one thing that you could do this week to make that more of a concrete reality in your life? I take refuge in the Lord in these ways. I delight in the holy ones, those who honor the Lord. I bless the Lord who guides me and give thanks for his counsel. I speak truth to myself about myself, even in the dark, wakeful, vulnerable hours of the night. I dwell in the presence of the Lord. May that be true for you in new and deeper ways this week. God bless you.